Today we will continue our introductory chemistry lectures focusing on organic and inorganic compounds. At a basic level, all living and non-living things are made of elements. However, the line between living and non-living matter is more complex than it may appear. Scientists have successfully determined the chemical composition of many substances found in living organisms, but they have not yet been able to combine the substances to create life itself. In college, chemistry major typically first study inorganic chemistry, followed by organic chemistry before progressing to biochemistry. Inorganic chemistry deals with inorganic compounds, while organic chemistry focuses on organic compounds. What is the difference between inorganic and organic compounds? Historically, in the 18th century, the term organic was used by chemists to describe substances derived from living organisms such as plants and animals. However, now we understand that organic compounds can be synthesized from inorganic compounds without the need of any so-called vital force. Most of the compounds that make up living organisms are organic compounds, which all contain element carbon. Carbon has a unique ability due to its atomic structure. It can form four stable covalent bonds. Why can carbon form four covalent bonds? Bonds between atoms hold them together. In this slide, each line represents a covalent bond, which holds atoms together within a molecule. Carbon's ability to form four bonds comes from its atomic structure, specifically the number of valence electrons and paired electrons in its outer shell. In the Bohr reservoir model, the second shell of carbon atom contains four unpaired electrons, which can pair with electrons from other atoms. Here they are. 1, 2, 3, 4. This allows carbon to form four covalent bonds. This bonding capability allows carbon to create a vast variety of compounds, including chains and rings. For example, in a fatty acid molecule, carbon atoms are linked in chain. Each line in a structural formula represents a covalent bond, and carbon consistently forms four bonds, which can include single or double covalent bonds. The structures formed by carbon can range from simple, consisting of a few atoms, to highly complex with many atoms. Fortunately for living things, most carbon compounds are very stable, which is essential for life. Even though carbon is the main element in organic compounds, living things also contain hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, and phosphorus. As you have just learned, it is easy to identify whether a chemical is organic or inorganic by looking at its structure. If you see carbon atoms present, the substance is organic. But how do we determine if substance is organic or inorganic? Just simply by looking at it. For example, if I have this substance, is it organic or inorganic? We can easily find out through a simple experiment. Check if it burns. Aha, it's burning. And not only that, it's leaving behind a black ash. What is this black ash? It is carbon. Well, most of it is a carbon. When organic compounds burn, they leave carbon behind. Normally, organic compounds burn away completely, but if the temperature is not very high, not all of the carbon escapes. Carbon escapes as a carbon dioxide, and hydrogen escapes as water vapor into the atmosphere. The flame you see is the energy released during this combustion. One thing to keep in mind. What I describe is a quick way to determine whether a compound is organic or inorganic. While many organic compounds do burn and often leave behind carbon, this method is not universally reliable for identifying organic compounds. more specific chemical tests, such as detecting carbon-hydrogen bonds, or advanced tools like spectroscopy, are needed for accurate identification. What we just burned was cellulose, the primary component of paper. It consists of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen arranged in long chains. When burned, oxygen, a highly reactive element, breaks down the cellulose into carbon dioxide and water, releasing energy. This type of reaction is called combustion. Let's summarize. Organic compounds are predominantly made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. In biological molecules, carbon atoms often form long chains called carbon backbones, with side groups attached like ribs on a backbone. Organic compounds typically char and burn away, leaving behind black ash if temperature isn't high enough. Black ash is leftover carbon that has not fully combusted. Now, let's apply this knowledge. If I ask you whether a pair of scissors is organic or inorganic, what would you say? You don't need to burn the scissors to know that the metal parts are inorganic. But the plastic handle could be organic, as plastic can burn and leave black ash. However, there are exceptions. Can you think of substances that contain carbon but are still inorganic? One example is a carbon dioxide, and we cannot burn carbon dioxide even though it contains carbon. Similarly, carbon monoxide is another inorganic compound containing carbon that does not burn. Other exceptions include cyanides and carbides, which contain carbon but are considered inorganic. Now, let's revisit an earlier question. What happens to the hydrogen when paper burns? It escapes as water vapor. When a paper is burning, what is happening to its carbon? It escapes as carbon dioxide. As we learned in previous lectures, electrons are located in a cloud around the atom's nucleus. While we cannot pinpoint the exact location of an electron at any given moment, we know they are almost likely found in a specific region called shells, each associated with different energy levels. The closer an electron shell is to the nucleus, the fewer electrons it can hold, and the lower its energy level. The shell closest to the nucleus holds up to 2 electrons, which are strongly attracted to the protons in the nucleus and have lowest energy. Once this shell is filled, additional electrons occupy the next shell, which can hold up to 8 electrons. For most atoms of biological significance, stability is achieved when the outer shell contains 8 electrons. This is called the octet rule. Hydrogen with the single shell is an exception, needing only 2 electrons for stability. Recall from our previous lecture that I asked you to focus on the unpaired electrons in the outer shell of an atom. Let's take nitrogen as an example. It has 3 unpaired electrons in its outer shell. Carbon, on the other hand, has 4 unpaired electrons. And oxygen has 2. These unpaired electrons determine the atom's reactivity and ability to form bonds. The electrons in the outer shell, called valence electrons, play the most critical role in chemical bonding. We often represent these valence electrons using a Lewis structure, which shows how many electrons are available for bonding. By looking at the Lewis structure, you can easily identify the number of paired and unpaired electrons in an atom. So, the number of valence electrons determines how many bonds an atom can form. For example, hydrogen can form 1 bond, nitrogen can form 3 bonds, carbon can form 4 bonds, oxygen can form 2 bonds. A compound forms when 2 or more atoms from different elements combine in a definite proportion. Chemical bonds hold these atoms together. Let's take a look at an example. Each hydrogen atom needs 1 electron to fill its valence shell. Here's 2 hydrogen atoms. Here we end up with a molecule of hydrogen. 2 hydrogen atoms are held together by a covalent bond forming when their single electrons pair up. Carbon, needing 4 electrons to complete its valence shell, can bond with 4 hydrogen atoms. The result is a stable compound called methane. Now let's review covalent bonds. A covalent bond is formed when 2 or more atoms share electrons holding them together. For example, 2 hydrogen atoms can form hydrogen molecule by sharing electrons. We also mention other molecules such as carbon dioxide, water, and oxygen. The molecular formula shows the types and numbers of atoms in a molecule. For example, a molecular formula of carbon dioxide, CO2, tells us that there are 2 oxygen atoms and 1 carbon atom in the molecule. Similarly, molecule of water has 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. Now complete a very simple exercise. List the elements present in each of the given chemical formulas. For example, sodium, oxygen, hydrogen, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and so on. You just worked on a molecular or chemical formula, but here is also structural formula which shows how atoms are arranged in a molecule. For example, the structural formula of glucose reveals its ring-like structure. While we don't show all the carbon atoms explicitly on the diagram, each corner of the ring represents a carbon atom. Those carbons never written on the structural formula. In chemical nomenclature, the carbons are numbered starting with the right group, so glucose has 6 carbon atoms. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So glucose has 6 carbon atoms. Glucose is a 6-carbon compound. Let's take a look at propane, a gas commonly used for cooking. The name propane tells us that there are 3 carbon atoms, from the Greek propa meaning 3. Each carbon atom forms 4 covalent bonds with hydrogen and other carbon atoms. The molecular formula for propane is C3H8, 3 carbons and 8 hydrogen atoms. In chemistry helps the following count: meta, eta, propa, buta, penta, hexa, hepta, octa, nona, deca. For example, methane 1 carbon, ethane 2 carbons, propane 3 carbons, and butane 4 carbons. Follow this pattern. After butane, the prefixes generally follow Greek numbering: penta, hexa, hepta, octa, nona, deca. The system helps us easily identify the number of carbon atoms in a molecule. How do we name this compound? It has 5 carbons in its formula. Pentane. It is pentane because there are 5 carbons in its molecule. Penta stands for 5 in Greek. Here is the molecular formula of pentane. It has 5 carbons and 12 hydrogens. Now let's talk about electronegativity. Electronegativity refers to an atom's ability to attract electrons in a covalent bond. For example, in water molecule, oxygen is highly electronegative and pulls electrons towards itself, giving a slight negative charge, while hydrogen atom carry a slight positive charge. This is why oxygen in water molecules is often described as electron hungry. In this slight charge in parentheses means slight charge. Now let's cover some important information about covalent bonds. There are 2 types of covalent bonds: polar covalent bonds and non-polar covalent bonds. Polar covalent bonds occur when electrons are shared unequally between atoms. This uneven sharing of electrons causes an uneven distribution of electrical charge in the molecule. You can think of it as if electron is favoring one atom over other, spending more time with it. As a result, the atom develops slight positive and negative charges. The atom that attracts electron more strongly becomes slightly negative, since electrons carry a negative charge. The atom that attracts the electron less strongly becomes slightly positive because it has fewer electrons around it. What happens when these polar molecules enter water? Since water also has slight charges and opposite charges attract the water, molecules will pull these polar molecules toward themselves, dissolving them. We call these molecules hydrophilic. Hydro means water and philic means love. So these molecules love water and dissolve in it. Water in this case acts as a solvent, and the substances that dissolve in water are called solutes. Non-polar covalent bonds, on the other hand, form when two atoms share electrons equally because they have similar electronegativity. Since their electrons spend equal time with both atoms, no slight charges form, and the molecule remains neutral. This compound is called hydrophobic, meaning water-fearing. Even though the water molecule carries slight positive and negative charges, non-polar molecules don't have any charges for water to pull on, so they remain insoluble in water. Here is the tricky question. Can a substance be hydrophilic but not dissolved in water? The answer is cotton. Cotton is hydrophilic but do not dissolve in water. Cotton cellulose molecules have regions of slight positive and negative charges due to its polar bonds, but the molecules are too large to dissolve. This is why cotton towels absorb water but do not break down in the wash. And this is why water adheres to the cellulose fiber in the cotton towel, allowing you to dry your body after a shower. Now let's move on to another type of bond, the ionic bond. An ionic bond forms when one atom gives up one or more electrons to another atom. The transfer causes both atoms to become charged. One becomes positively charged, losing electrons, and the other becomes negatively charged, gaining electrons. These opposite charges attract and form the bond. Let's take a look at the example of sodium chloride, or as we usually refer to it, a table salt. Sodium loses an electron and becomes positively charged, now called a cation. Chlorine gains that electron, becoming negatively charged, and is referred as chloride or an anion. This attraction between opposite charges forms an ionic compound, not a molecule. In crystals like salts, the formula represents the ratio of elements rather than distinct molecules. Here are the important definitions to keep in mind. Cation is an ion with more protons than electrons. Anion is an ion with more electrons than protons. Next tricky question. What is the charge of a sodium atom? The answer is neutral, as the atoms are always neutral. Only when sodium loses an electron does it become positively charged ion. Compounds formed by anionic bonds called ionic compounds or salts. Salts are often found in nature as crystals of various sizes and shapes. Unlike covalent compounds, a salt crystal does not consist of discrete molecules. Covalently bound molecules have a definite size and fixed number of atoms. In contrast, the formula for ionic compound, like sodium chloride, represents only the ratio of elements present in the crystal structure, not individual molecules. Everything in repetition. So here's another exercise. What is the charge of the sodium atom? And what is the charge of the chlorine atom? They are both neutral, since the questions are specifically about the atoms, not ions. Now pause the video and answer the following questions. Here are the answers. Pause the video and answer the following questions. Here are the answers. Now, what causes the atom to bond together in ionic interaction? It is the opposite electrical charges that cause the atom to bond together. When you place salt in water, the water molecules surround the ions. The positive ends of water, hydrogens, surround chloride ions, which are negative. The negative ends of water, oxygen, surround sodium ions, which are positive. This process is called dissociation. Now let's talk about another type of bond, the hydrogen bond. This is weaker bond compared to covalent or ionic bonds. In theory, the ionic bond is the strongest of all the bonds. However, in biological system, covalent bonds are the strongest. Why? Because, as you have observed, salt and an ionic compound dissociates in water, and life on Earth is water-based. Therefore, when biologists ask you which bond is the strongest, the correct answer is covalent bonds. On the other hand, if chemists ask you the same question in non-aqueous context, the answer would be ionic bonds. Okay, let's go back to the hydrogen bonds. A hydrogen bond is a specific type of dipole-dipole interaction that occurs between hydrogen atoms in polar bond, such as between hydrogen and electronegative atoms like oxygen, nitrogen, or fluorine, and another electronegative atom. While it is a very weak chemical bond, it plays an important role in biological processes. We have already discussed that polar molecules have unequally shared electrons. For example, in water molecule, oxygen is more electronegative, so it pulls the shared electrons closer, becoming slightly negative, while the hydrogen atom becomes slightly positive. Due to these slight charges, there is an interaction between the slightly positive hydrogen of the molecule and the slightly negative oxygen of another. This interaction is what we call a hydrogen bond. An example of how this works. If you place a piece of paper in water, the water molecules will move up through the paper, pulling other molecules along with them, eventually wetting the entire piece. This happens because of the hydrogen bonds. Hydrogen bonds also explain why some insects can walk on water. The insects are light enough that they don't break the hydrogen bonds at the surface of the water, while we, being much heavier, would break them and sink. Cohesion is the attraction between similar substances like water molecules sticking to each other. For example, if you put two drops of water together, they will merge to form a larger drop because of cohesion. Take a look. On the other hand, adhesion is the attraction between different substances, such as when a drop of water clings to a leaf. The water sticks to the leaf because of adhesion between the water and the leaf's surface. Now, why does water tend to get things wet? This happens because water forms hydrogen bonds with solid surfaces, except for substances such as oils and waxes, which are composed of non-polar molecules. These hydrophobic, water-fearing substances do not mix with water. For example, if you dip a candle made of wax into water, the candle will come out completely dry because the water cannot adhere to its hydrophobic surface. One more interesting property of water is capillary action, which allows it to flow in narrow spaces without the help of external forces like gravity. Capillary action happens due to combined forces of cohesion and adhesion. Adhesion between the water and the walls of the narrow tube causes the water climb upward, while cohesion holds the water molecules together, forming an upward meniscus. The height to which water rises is limited by surface tension and gravity. The narrower the tube, the higher the water can climb. That concludes our overview of some key principles in organic and inorganic chemistry. In our next lecture, we will dive into acids and bases.